So, good day everyone. We are the Group 7 and today we are discussing about the nervous system. So, the nervous system provides for higher mental function and emotional expression. It maintains homeostasis and regulates the activities of muscles and glands. So, the nervous system is the master control and communication system of the body. Every thought, action, and emotion reflects its activity. It communicates with body cells using electrical impulses which are rapid and specific and cause almost immediate responses. So the nervous system transmits signals between the brain and the rest of the body, including the internal organs. In this way, the nervous system's activity controls the ability to move, breathe, see, think, and more. The basic unit of the nervous system is a nerve cell or a neuron. So, your nervous system is your body's command center, originating from your brain. It controls your movement, thoughts, and automatic responses to the world around you. So this is your neurons, and it has many parts, which is the dendrites, the receiving signals from other cells, cell body or soma, organizes and keeps the cell functional. The nucleus controls the entire neuron. The cell membrane protects the cell. The axon hillock generates impulse in the neuron. The axon transfers signals to other cells. The node of Ranvier allows diffusion of ions. The myelin sheath increases the speed of the signal. The Schwann cell, which produces the myelin sheath. The action terminal forms junctions with other cells. So the part of neurons, first is the dendrites. They are specialized extensions that resemble the branch of a tree. Dendrites help to increase the surface area available for connections with the adjacent neurons and thus in receiving incoming signals from them. So the functions of dendrites are acquiring chemical impulse from other cells and neurons and converting the chemical signals into electrical impulses. So the dendrites are appendages that are designed to receive communications from other cells. They are assembled and a tree-like structure, forming projections that become stimulated by other neurons and conduct the electrochemical charge to the cell or body. In other words, the main function of dendrites is to receive information from other neurons or from the external environment and carry the information of the cell body to the cell body rather. Next is the cell body or soma. So the cell body or soma, it is a core of the neuron. Similar to a cell contains the nucleus and other cellular organelles. The cell body is also the largest part of a neuron, enclosed by a cell membrane that protects the cell from its immediate surroundings and allows its interaction with the outside environment. So the functions of the cell body is supporting and organizing the functions of the whole neuron, and joining the signals received by the dendrites and passing them to the axons to the next part of the neuron. So the second one is the cell body or soma. It is the core of the neuron that is similar to the cell that contains the nucleus and other cellular organelles. The cell body is also the largest part of the neuron, enclosed by a cell membrane that protects the cell from its immediate surroundings and allows its interaction with the outside environment. So the functions of the cell body is supporting and organizing the functions of the whole neuron and joining the signals received by the dendrites and passing them to the axons, the next part of the neuron. So the soma or cell body is essentially the core of the neuron because its function is to maintain the cell and to keep the neuron functioning efficiently. So the next one is the axons. They are fine, elongated fiber-like extension of the nerve cell membrane. Axons run from the cell body of one neuron until the terminal of the next neuron. They are the longest part of the neuron that varies widely in length, with some are as tiny as 0.1 millimeters, while some others can be over 3 feet. The larger of the diameter of the axon, the faster is the rate of transmission of nerve signals. Sometimes, a single axon is highly branched to allow better communication with multiple target neurons at the same time. So, each neuron in your brain has one long cable that snakes away from the main part of the cell. This cable, several times thinner than a human hair, is called an axon, and it is where electrical impulses from the neuron travel away to be received by other neurons. So axon have three parts, which is the axon hillock, the myelin sheath, and nodes of the nucleus. So the axon hillock is the part of the axon which remains attached to the cell body or soma. So the hillock is the first portion of the axon and the region of the cell body from which the axon leaves. The axon hillock is also known as the trigger zone because this is where the action potentials are started. Next is the myelin sheath, the layer of acid produced from specialized cells called Schwann cells that are wrapped around the axon. So the myelin sheath is located here. Then the third one is the nodes of Rainier. The nodes of Rainier is the gaps in the discontinuous myelin sheath is running along the axon. So this is the myelin sheath. Then the axon terminal, also called synaptic button or terminal button, is the terminal branch of the axon located at the very end of the neuron. They are the farthest from the soma and containing chemical messengers called neurotransmitters in specialized structures called synaptic vesicles. Synapse or synaptic cleft is the small space between or gap between two adjacent neurons. It is formed between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendrites of the next neurons. Then the function is releasing the neurotransmitters through specific transport vesicles called synaptic vesicles from one neuron to adjacent connected neurons called exocytosis. So the axon terminal is the end of the axon where action potentials are conducted down to. It is here that neurotransmitters are released.
The nervous system has two main divisions, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, which occupy the dorsal body cavity and act as the integrating and command centers of the nervous system. They interpret the incoming sensory information and tissue instructions based on past experience and current conditions. The brain is an organ of nervous tissue that commands task-group responses, senses, movement, emotion, language, communication, thinking, and memory. So the brain is the organ that controls every processes that regulates our body. It is found within our cranium. There are four regions of the brain: the cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, and brainstem. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It is composed of left and right hemispheres. It performs higher functions like interpreting touch, vision, and hearing, as well as speech, reasoning, emotions, learning, and a fine control movement. So the cerebrum is the largest portion of our brain and encompasses about 2/3 of the brain mass. So, mao gid siya ang pinakadako nga part sa atong brain nga nag-comprise sa gray matter or the cerebral cortex and white matter in the center. So it initiates and coordinates movement and regulates temperature. So the two major parts of the cerebrum is right hemisphere, which is the one who's control the left side of the body, and the Left which hemisphere. controls the muscle on the right side of the body. The four lobes of the cerebrum are the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. The frontal is the most anterior part of the brain and responsible for higher cognitive functions such as memory, emotions, impulse control, problem-solving, social interaction, and motor function. The parietal lobe is one of the major lobes in the brain, roughly located at the upper back area of the skull. The parietal lobe is vital for sensory perception and integration, including the management of taste, hearing, sight, touch, and smell. The temporal lobe sits behind the ears and most commonly associated with the processing auditory information with the encoding of memory. And lastly, the occipital lobe sits at the back area of the head and are responsible for visual perception, including color, form, and motion. The cerebellum is part of the brain located at the back of the head, just above and behind where spinal cord connects to your brain itself. The cerebellum is important for making postural adjustments in order to maintain balance. The diencephalon or interbrain sits atop of the brainstem and is enclosed by the cerebral hemispheres and inferior to the corpus callosum and cerebral cortex. The major structure of the diencephalon is the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Next is the brainstem. The brainstem is about the size of a thumb in a diameter and approximately 7.5 centimeter long. Its structures are the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. In addition to providing pathway for ascending and descending tracts, the brainstem has many small gray matter areas. These nuclei produce the rigidly programmed autonomic behaviors necessary for survival. In addition, some are associated with the cranial nerves and control vital activities such as breathing and blood pressure. A relatively small part of the brainstem, the midbrain, extend from the mammillary bodies. The cerebrum has two cerebral hemispheres, which is the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. The right hemisphere controls the muscles on the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere is the one who's controlling the right side of the body. Cerebral hemispheres or cortex gray matter localize and enterprises sensory inputs, controls voluntary and skeletal muscle activities that acts in intellectual and emotional processing. Basal nuclei, subcortical motor centers help control skeletal muscle movements. The diencephalon has two major structures, which is the Thalamus and hypothalamus. The thalamus relays sensory impulses to the cerebral cortex, relays impulses between cerebral motor cortex and lower motor centers, and involved in memory. Hypothalamus shift integration, center of autonomic and voluntary nervous system, regulates body temperature, food intake, water balance, and thirst, regulates hormonal output of anteriorly pituitary gland, and acts as a endocrine organ producing ADH and oxytocin. There are three parts of brainstem: the midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. The midbrain contains visual and auditory reflex centers, contains subcortical motor centers, contains nuclei for cranial nerves 3 and 4, contains projection fibers. Pons relays information from the cerebrum to the cerebellum, cooperates with the medullary centers to control respiratory rate and depth, contains nuclei of cranial nerves 5 and 7, contains projection fibers. Medulla oblongata relays ascending sensory pathways, impulses from skin and proprioceptors, contains nuclei controlling heart rate, blood vessel, diameter, respiratory rate, vomiting, etc. Relays and sensory information to the cerebellum, contains nuclei of cranial nerves 8 and 12 rather, contains projection fibers, site of crossover of pyramids. The cerebellum processes information from cerebral motor cortex, proprioceptors, and visual and equilibrium pathways, provides instructions to cerebral motor cortex and subcortical motor centers, resulting in smooth, coordinated skeletal muscle movements responsible for proper balance and posture. The cylindrical spinal cord, a continuation of the brain, is an association and communication center. It plays a major role in spinal reflex activity and provides neural pathways to and from the brain. Enclosed within the vertebral column, the spinal cord extends from the foramen magnum of the skull to the first or second lumbar vertebrae. The three primary roles of the spinal cord are to send motor commands from the brain to the body, send sensory information from the body to the brain, and coordinate reflexes. The spinal cord is organized segmentally with 31 pairs of spinal nerves emanating in it. Your spinal cord has three main parts. The cervical which is the neck, thoracic, chest, lumbar, lower back. You have 31 pairs of nerves and nerve roots in your spinal cord. These include 8 cervical nerves that starting in your neck and running mostly to your face and head. 12 thoracic nerve pairs, nerves in your upper body that extends to your chest, upper back, and abdomen. 5 lumbar nerve pairs, nerves in the lower back that run to your legs and feet. 5 sacral nerve pairs, nerves in the lower back extending into the pelvis. You also have nerve bundle at the base of your spinal cord called the cauda equina. The cauda equina comes from the Latin word for horsetail because early anatomists thought that nerve collection looked like horsetail. The cauda equina includes nerves that provide sensation to your body. Your spinal nerves sends electrical signals between your brain, spinal cord, and the rest of your body. These electrical nerve signals help you feel sensation, which is sensory nerves, and move your body, motor nerves. So like the brain, the spinal cord is cushioned and protected by meninges, the dura mater, and arachnoid meningeal coverings extend beyond L2 and the spinal cord approximately to the level of S2, and the fibrous extension of the pia mater extends even farther to attach the posterior coccyx. Most of the spinal cord is about the diameter of a thumb, but it is obviously enlarged in the cervical and lumbar areas where the nerves serving the upper and lower limbs leave the cord. Because the spinal cord does not extend to the end of the vertebral column, spinal nerves emerging from the inferior end of the cord travel through the vertebral canal for some distance before exiting. This collection of spinal nerves at the inferior end of the vertebral canal is called the cauda equina. So in the human brain, there are 12 cranial nerves. The cranial nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system, but they are best identified during the study of the brain. The 12 pairs of the cranial nerves primarily serve the head and neck. Only one pair, the vagus nerves, extends to the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The cranial nerves are numbered in order, and in most cases, their names reflect the major structures they control. The cranial nerves by number, Roman numeral, name, function, and testing methods. This information should be committed to memory. The first one is the olfactory. Function purely sensory, carries impulses for the sense of smell. Testing methods is persons is asked to sniff and identify aromatic substances such as oils and cloves and vanillas. The second one is the optic, purely sensory, carries impulses for vision. Vision and visual field are determined with eye chart and by testing the point at which the person first sees an object moving into the visual field. Eye interior viewed with ophthalmoscope to detect swelling of optic disc, point at which optic nerve leaves the eye, and to observe blood vessels. The third one is oculomotor. Oculomotor is mixed sensory and motor. Motor fibers to inferior oblique and superior inferior and medial rectus muscles, which direct eyeball to levator palpebrae muscles of eyelid to iris and smooth muscle controlling lens shape and pupil size. Pupils are examined for size, shape, and equality. Papillary reflex is tested with penlight. Pupils should consist when illuminated. Convergence for near vision and tested as the subject's ability to follow objects up, down, side to side, and diagonally with eye. The fourth one is trochlear. Mix provides motor fibers to superior oblique muscles and extrinsic eye muscle. Tested in common with cranial nerve 3. The fifth one is trigeminal. It is also mixed, conducts sensory impulses from skin of face and anterior scalp from mucosae of mouth and nose. Also contains motor fibers that activate and chewing muscles. Sensations of pain, touch, and temperature are tested with safety pin and hot and cold objects. Corneal reflex tested with whips of cotton. Motor branch assessed by asking persons to clench the teeth, open the mouth against resistance, and move the jaw side to side. The sixth one is abducens, carries motor fibers to lateral rectus muscles of eye. It is tested in common with cranial nerve 3. The seventh one is the facial. It is also mixed, supplies motor fibers to muscles of facial expression and lacrimal and salivary glands, carries sensory fibers from taste receptors of anterior tongue. Anterior two-thirds of tongue is tested for ability to taste sweet like sugar, salty sour like vinegar, and bitter quinine substances. Symmetry of face is checked. Subject is asked to close eyes, smile, whistle, and so on. Tearing is assessed with ammonia fumes. The eighth one is verticochlear. It is purely sensory and transmits impulses for senses of equilibrium and hearing. Hearing is checked by air and bone conduction using turning fork. The ninth one is the glossopharyngeal. Mix motor fibers serve pharyngeal muscles, and salivary glands. Sensory fibers carries impulses from pharynx, posterior tongue, taste buds, and pressure receptors of carotid artery. The testing method of it is gag and swallowing reflexes are the check. Subject is asked to speak and cough. Posterior third of the tongue may be tested for taste. The 10th one is the mix vagus. Motor fibers to pharynx and larynx and sensory fibers from same structures. A very large portion is composed of parasympathetic motor fibers which supply heart and smooth muscles of abdominal visceral organs transmit sensory impulses from viscera. As for cranial nerve, 9 and 10 are tested in common because they both serve muscles of throat and mouth. Number 11, accessory. Mix provide motor fibers to sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscle. Sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscle are checked for strength by asking person to rotate head and elevate shoulders against resistance. And the last one, the number 12, is the hypoglossal. It is also mixed sensory and motor. Motor fibers serve muscles of tongue and sensory fibers carry impulses from tongue. Person is asked to protrude and retract tongue. Any deviations in position are noted.
Good day, ma'am. This is Mark J.B. Lagrimas, and I'll be tackling about the peripheral nervous system. So, the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, is the division of the nervous system containing all nerves that lie outside of the central nervous system, or the CNS. The PNS primary role is to connect the CNS to the organs, limbs, and skin. These nerves extend from the central nervous system to the outermost areas of the body, and from the brain up to its to the spinal cord. It connects the CNS and PNS, and the PNS has 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and there are also 12 pairs of cranial nerve that attach to the brain. The first is the olfactory nerve. The second, the optic nerve. The oculomotor nerve, the trochlear nerve, the trigeminal nerve, the abducens nerve, the facial nerve, the auditory nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, the vagus nerve, the accessory nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve. Let's talk about the olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve origin or course is that the fibers arise from the olfactory receptors in the nasal mucosa and synapse with the olfactory bulbs, which in turn send fibers to the olfactory cortex. Its function is purely sensory. It carries impulses to the sense of smell. Next is the optic nerve. Fibers arise from the retina of the eye and form an optic nerve. The two optic nerves form the optic charisma by partial crossover of the fibers. The fibers continue to the optic cortex as the optic tracts. Its function is purely sensory also. It carries impulses for vision. Next is the oculomotor nerve. Fibers run from the midbrain to the eye. The function, it supplies motor fibers to the 4 of the 6 muscles, superior, inferior, and medial rectus, and inferior oblique, that direct the eyeball to the eyelid and to the internal eye muscles controlling lens shape and pupil size. The next is the trochlear nerve. Its fibers run from the midbrain to the eye. Its function is supply motor fibers for one external eye muscle or the superior oblique. Next, we talk about the trigeminal nerves. Its fibers emerge from the pons and form three divisions that run to the face. Its function is to conduct sensory impulses from the skin of the face and mucosa of the nose and mouth. Also contain motor fibers that activate the chewing of muscles. Next, let's talk about the abducens nerve. Its fiber leave the pons and run to the eye. Its function is to supply motor fibers to the lateral rectus muscle, which rolls the eye laterally. Next is the facial nerve. Its fiber leave the pons and run to the face. Its function is that it activates the muscles of the facial expression and lacrimal and salivary glands, carries sensory impulses from the taste buds of anterior of the tongue. Next, we'll talk about the vestibulocochlear nerve. Its fiber run from the equilibrium and hearing receptors of the inner ear to the brainstem. Its function is purely sensory. Vestibular branch transmits impulses for the sense of balance, and cochlear branch transmit impulses to the sense of hearing. Next, let's talk about the glossopharyngeal nerve. Its fiber emerge from the medulla and run to the throat. Its function is to supply motor fibers to the pharynx or throat and promote swallowing and saliva production. It carries sensory impulses also from the taste buds of the posterior tongue and from the pressure receptors of the carotid artery. Next, let's talk about the vagus nerve. Its fiber emerge from the medulla and descend into the thorax and abdominal cavity. Its function is that the fibers carry sensory impulses from and motor impulses to the pharynx, larynx, and abdominal and thoracic viscera. Most motor fibers are parasympathetic or involuntary. Parasympathetic fibers that promote digestive activity and help regulate heart activity. Next, let's talk about the accessory nerve. Its fiber arise from the superior spinal cord from the cervical 1 to cervical 5 and travel to the muscles of the neck and the back. Its function, mostly motor fibers that activate the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscles. And lastly, but not the least, the hypoglossal nerve. Its fiber run from the medulla to the tongue. Its function is motor fibers that controls the tongue movements. Sensory fibers carry impulses from the tongue. The peripheral nervous system has two divisions. First, the sensory apparent division. It is the nerve fibers that carry information to the central nervous system. Second, the motor division. The motor efferent division. It is the nerve fibers that carries impulses away from the central nervous system. And the motor or the efferent division has two subdivisions, which is the somatic nervous system, voluntary, autonomic nervous system, involuntary. So, the somatic nervous system is the impulses from skin, skeletal muscles, and joints, and it allows voluntary contraction of skeletal muscles. Then the subdivision called autonomic nervous system, it regulates involuntary actions such as glands, cardiac, and the muscles. The involuntary branch of the nervous system, which is the autonomic nervous system, consists of only motor nerves and subdivided again into two divisions, which are the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. First, let's talk about the autonomic functioning of its two subdivisions. First is the sympathetic, which has the fight or flight response. It is the response to unusual stimulus. It takes over to increase activities. And always remember the E, which is the E division for the sympathetic. That is equal to exercise, excitement, emergency, and some sort of embarrassment that is related to sympathetic. Next, let's talk about the parasympathetic or the housekeeping activities. Parasympathetic conserves energy. It maintains daily necessary body functions. And always remember the D division, which is the digestion, defecation, and diuresis. So, this is the graph of the nervous system. The nervous system is divided into two categories, which is the central nervous system or the CNS, that from the brain to the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system that carries messages to and from the CNS. So if the CNS is brain and spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system is the nerves that connects the from the peripheral nervous system, the nerve that connects to remaining parts of the body. So you can see here the peripheral nervous system has two division, which is the somatic and the autonomic, and the autonomic has two subdivisions, which are the sympathetic and sympathetic. So that's all for my report, ma'am. Thank you.
So the first homeostatic imbalance is called hydrocephalus. So hydrocephalus is the build-up fluid into the cavities or ventricles deep within the brain. The excess fluid increases in size or the size of the ventricles that puts pressure on the brain. So it is literally water on the brain. The hydrocephalus in a newborn baby causes the head to enlarge as the brain increases in size. Cerebrospinal fluid normally flows through the ventricles and bats the brain and spinal column, but the pressure of too much cerebrospinal fluid associated with hydrocephalus can damage brain tissues and cause a range of brain function problems. Hydrocephalus can happen at any age, and however, in adults, this condition is likely to result in brain damage because the skull is hard, and the accumulated fluid creates pressure that pressures soft nervous tissue and to restrict blood flow into the brain. So it occurs more frequently among infants and adults 60 and over. Surgically, or it can treat surgically for hydrocephalus that can restore and maintain normal cerebrospinal fluid levels in the brain. Different therapies are often required to manage symptoms or problems resulting from hydrocephalus. So the symptoms are the signs of hydrocephalus vary somewhat by age of onset. So like ang symptoms gikan sa infant, sa toddlers, sa middle-aged adults, and older adults. So sa infant is the common signs is unusually large head, a rapid increase in size of the head, a bulging of tense soft spot on the top of the head or ihang fontanelle. So ang physical signs and symptoms sa infant is nausea or vomiting, nausea, sleepiness or sluggishness, irritability, poor eating, seizures, eyes fixed downward, problems with muscle tone and strength. So
So
blurs
subcultures
is
is
headache,
headache,
the
the
blurred
blurred
or
or
double
double
vision,
vision,
abnormal
abnormal
eye movements,
movement,
poor
coordination,
coordination, poor
poor
appetite,
appetite,
then loss
then
of
loss of
bladder
bladder
control or
control or
frequent
frequent
urination.
urination.
So,
So,
ang
ang
sa
sa
middle age
age
adults
adults
is
is
headache,
headache,
loss of
loss of
coordination or
coordination or
balance,
balance,
vision
vision problems,
problems or
or
decline in
decline in
memory,
memory,
concentration, and
concentration,
other
and other
thinking
coping
skills that
skills
may
that
affect
affect
job
job
performance.
performance.
So sa
So, sa
older
older
adults
adults
is
is
loss
loss
of
of
bladder control or
control
a
or a
frequent urge to
urge to
urinate,
urinate,
memory
memory
loss,
loss,
progressive
progressive
loss of
loss of
other
other
thinking or
thinking or
reasoning
reasoning
skills,
skills,
difficulty
difficulty
walking,
walking,
often
often
described
described
as
as
a
a
shuffling gait
shuffling gait
or
or
the
the
feeling of
feeling
the
of
feet being
being
stuck,
stuck,
and
and
poor
poor
coordination
coordination
and
and
balance.
balance.
So, ang
So, ang
main
main
cause
cause
yun
yun is
is an
an
imbalance
imbalance
between how
between how
much
much cerebrospinal
cerebrospinal fluid is
fluid is
produced and
produced
how
and how
much
much
is
is
absorbed
absorbed
into the
into the
bloodstream.
bloodstream.
So,
So,
cerebrospinal
cerebrospinal
fluid is
fluid is
produced by
produced by
tissues
tissues
lining in
lining
the
in the
ventricles of the
the
brain.
brain.
It
It
flows
flows
through the
through the
ventricles
ventricles
by
by
way
way
of
of
interconnecting
interconnecting
channels.
channels.
The
The
fluid
fluid
eventually
eventually
flows
flows
into
to the
spaces
spaces
around the
around the
brain
brain
and
and
spinal
spinal
column.
column.
So,
So,
ang
ang
purpose
purpose
manggod
manggod
sa
sa
cerebrospinal
cerebrospinal
fluid
fluid
is mag-keep siya
keep
og
siya
brain
brain
buoyant
buoyant
or
or
allowing
allowing
the
the
relatively
relatively
heavy
heavy
brain to
brain
float
float
within the
within the
skull,
skull,
the
the
removing
moving
waste
waste
products of
of
brain's
brain's
metabolism,
metabolism
and
and
flowing
flowing
back and
back and
forth
forth
between the
between
brain
the brain
cavity and
cavity and
spinal
spinal
column
column
to
to
maintain a
maintain a
constant
constant
pressure
pressure
within the
within the
brain.
brain.
So,
So,
mao to
how to
siya
siya
ang cerebro
cerebral
ang
ang
hydrocephalus nga sa
sakit.
cerebro.
Cerebral.
So the
So, the
next is
next is
cerebral
cerebral
palsy.
palsy.
So
So,
anencephaly
anencephaly
is a
is
birth
a birth
defect in
defect
which the
which the
cerebrum
cerebrum
fails to
fails to
develop.
develop.
In
In
children with
children with
anencephaly
anencephaly
cannot
cannot
see,
see,
hear,
hear,
process
process
sensory
sensory
information,
information,
and these
and this
babies
babies
typically
typically
die
dies
soon
soon
after
after
birth.
birth.
So,
So,
cerebral
cerebral
palsy
palsy
or CP is a
is
group
a
of
group of
disorders that
disorders that
affect a
affect a
person's
person's
ability to
ability to
move
move
and maintain
and maintain
balance
balance
and
and
posture.
posture.
Cerebral
Cerebral
palsy
palsy
is the
is the
most
most
common
common
motor disability in
disability in
childhood.
childhood.
Cerebral
Cerebral
means having
having
to do
to
with the
do with the
brain,
brain,
and
and
palsy
palsy
means
means
weakness or
weakness or
problems with
problems with
using the
using the
muscles.
muscle.
So, ang
So, ang
cause
cause
sa
sa
cerebral
cerebral
palsy
palsy
is by
is by
the
the
abnormal brain
abnormal brain
developed or
developed or
damage
damage
to the
to the
developing
developing
brain
brain
that
that
affects a
affects a
person's
person's
ability to
ability
control his
to
or
his
her
or her
muscles.
muscle.
The
The
symptoms of
symptoms of
CP
CP
vary from
vary from
person to person.
person.
A
A
person with
person with
severe
severe
CP
CP
might need
might
to
need
use
to use
special
special
equipment to
equipment
be
to
able
be
to
able to
walk,
walk
or might
or
not
might not
be
be
able to
able to
walk at
walk at
all
all.
and might need lifelong
Lifelong
care.
care.
A
A
person with
person with
mild
mild,
CP, on the
on
other
the other
hand,
hand,
might
mild,
walk a little
a little
awkwardly
awkward,
but
might
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 need
need
any special
special
help.
help.
CP does
CP
not
does
get
not
worse over
worse over
time,
time,
though
though
the
the
exact
exact
symptoms
symptoms
can
can
change
change
over a
over a
person's
person's
lifetime.
lifetime.
So,
So,
ang early
early
signs sa
signs sa
CP
CP
is
is
there are
there
many
are many
different
different
types of
types of
disability
disability
naman. The
naman.
main signs that a
A
child
child
have
have
CP
CP
is
is
a
a
delay
delay
reaching
reaching
motor or
motor or
movement
movement
milestones,
milestones
such
such
as
as
rolling
rolling
over,
over,
sitting,
sitting,
standing, or
standing, or
walking.
walking.
So,
So,
the
the
baby
baby
that
that
is
is
older than
older
six
than
months of
6 of
age,
age,
if
if
if she
if she
doesn't roll
doesn't roll
over in
over
either
in either
direction,
direction,
or she
or she
cannot
cannot
bring her
bring her
hands
hands
together,
together,
or she has
she has the
difficulty
difficulty
bringing her
bringing her
hands to
hands
her
to her mouth,
mouth, or
or
she
she
reaches
reaches
out
out
by
by
only one
one
hand while
while
keeping the
keeping the
other
other
fists.
fists.